Hi folks, welcome to RJ Impact. Today we're going to be looking at the testimony from Thursday and Friday on this first week of the SBF FTX trial. As a reminder, SBF is in court accused of multiple counts of fraud in connection with his being CEO of FTX, the now bankrupt cryptocurrency exchange. Just as a general point, apparently during these couple of days, Sam Bankman-Fried spent a lot of time looking at his laptop, occasionally looking over at the jury, and didn't really spend too much time looking in the direction of the witnesses. Make of that what you will. On Thursday we had the continuation of the testimony from Adam Yedida. There was a line struck from Wednesday's testimony when Yedida had candidly said FTX defrauded all its customers, and it's unclear to me whether the jury were in court at the time that was being discussed. Anyway, prosecutor Daniel Sassoon took her turn to question Yedida on Thursday and focused on the $8 billion that Alameda owed to FTX. For a time, FTX deposited money into what they thought was FTX, Yedida relayed. It was actually an Alameda-controlled bank with Silvergate's bank called North Dimension. The account, but not its controller, was actually published on the FTX website, we heard. Yedida also gave testimony showing how shoddy some of the office accounting was. A bug at one point showed the liability of FTX as $16 billion instead of $8 billion, as if $8 billion made a lot of difference in the grand scheme of things. Yedida was concerned about this amount anyway and confronted SBF on it, asking whether Alameda could repay the $8 billion. SBF appeared worried or nervous, he said, which was not typical of him. I wanted to be certain that Alameda could repay that debt, he said. And he said that SBF told him, we were bulletproof last year, but not this year. It could take 6 months to 3 years to become bulletproof again. Now the point to make here is that this conversation happened in around June or July 2022, months before the collapse of FTX itself. In other words, the events in November weren't caused by an extraordinary set of circumstances, they were a build-up of risks caused by mismanagement at the company, and that Sam Bankman-Fried was aware. Yedida also relayed that SBF encouraged employees to use Signal, which is a messaging app that can auto-delete messages. SBF said it was all downside to keep messages. One Signal group, referring to the penthouse, that's the $35 million penthouse that SBF and other employees lived in, was called People of the House. Here's an extract from that group. I'm not sure how the prosecution got hold of it, if it was set to auto-delete, but anyway, they showed it in court, and at the bottom here you can see that Sam Bankman-Fried is appearing to say Alameda's going to provide all of this for free. And anyway, that's my takeaway from that. And then we had Everdell for the defence. He tried to highlight that Sam Bankman-Fried never bought fancy watches, sports cars or yachts. SBF was in constant dialogue with government officials. Was Alameda successful? Was it profitable? Everdell asked. I don't know if that's true, Yedida said. Under Everdell's questioning, we found out that Yedida's base salary was around $175,000 to $200,000, but he received multiple bonuses of more than $12 million in cash and company equity, and invested most of the cash he received back into FTX equity, and that stake is now worthless. In what I guess was a cringe moment in court, SBF told Yedida that he and Caroline Ellison had had sex. Was it a good idea for them to date? SBF asked Yedida. No, he replied, and SBF said he was expecting that answer. I don't really get that line of questioning for the defence, because we've already heard that the prosecution want to say that Caroline Ellison was really calling SBF's shots, and that exchange seems to back that theory up, doesn't it? Unless I'm missing something. Everdell got in trouble with the judge. He kept repeating questions and referring to things that the jury had already heard, leading to many objections from the prosecutors. Judge Kaplan before lunch admonished him on this, and again after lunch reminding him that he was essentially on thin ice if he kept going down that route. We had one of our star witnesses appear next, Gary Wang. He was the Chief Technology Officer for FTX and one of the co-founders of the company, owning 10% of it, according to a signed document produced in court. Wang has pled guilty to fraud in connection with his role at FTX, securities fraud and commodities fraud, and wire fraud amongst them. Attorney Nicholas Roos for the government asked him directly, "Did you commit financial crimes whilst working at FTX?" "Yes," was Wang's simple response. And he went on to say that those frauds were carried out with the help of Sam Bankman-Fried, Nishad Singh and Caroline Ellison. "Mr. Wang, do you see any of the people you committed those crimes with in the courtroom today?" "Yes." "Who do you see?" "Sam Bankman-Fried," he said. There was some detail that was got into, but SBF essentially directed him to provide advantages to Alameda that were not available to other FTX customers. For example, the ability to place orders faster than the other market makers. The changes to the tech, or privileges as they were called, meant that Alameda could make unlimited withdrawals even if its balance was negative, and normally you'd have to provide extra collateral or margin to allow this to happen, and this wasn't made public, and Gary admitted to lying to the public about this. And then this was utilised by Alameda, which led inevitably to the $8 billion hole we've heard about. I said unlimited. Apparently there was a line of credit that was capped at $65 billion. Now, what is the difference between unlimited and $65 billion? To me at least, there's not a lot of difference, but who knows. A bit of a human moment in this instance, because apparently SBF was looking from his former friend Gary Wang to the floor and back again and to the floor, and looked particularly upset and at one point put his head in his hands. Some of the testimony covered the final days of FTX. SBF, Wang and Singh had had an emergency meeting to discuss shutting down Alameda, but they decided against it. Why was that? Because we were aware Alameda had no way to repay what they understood at that point to be a $14 billion hole in its books. Now to me this is perplexing. You keep it open because it can't pay its debts? Aren't you just putting future customers at risk and potentially making it worse for existing customers or investors? It does seem upside down to me. Anyway, the company posted tweets about the slow processing of withdrawals from November the 7th. It was banking hours, they said, and SBF tweeted personally, "All was fine. FTX was not fine and assets were not fine," Wang said. An interesting anecdote arose when Wang was asked about the Bahamian Securities Commission meeting which took place on the 12th of November after FTX had declared bankruptcy. SBF had told Wang to transfer assets to the Bahamian authorities whilst they drove to the meeting, and SBF and his father Joseph were the only ones in the meeting. Wang didn't participate. He confirmed that he'd signed a cooperation agreement, effectively for leniency with the prosecutors, and faces up to 50 years in jail on sentencing. Some interesting points were made about loans that he'd received personally, for example a $1 million personal loan and then a $200 to $300 million loan that were in his name but were not put into his own account but invested by SBF. I think we might hear more about these in due course. Anyway, in a big surprise to me, as early as 2020, so that's somewhere between 2 and 3 years before the bankruptcy, Wang had discovered Alameda's negative balance and that it exceeded FTX revenues. This indicated to Wang that Alameda was taking customer deposits from FTX, and he'd brought this to SBF's attention on several occasions. But even though they were co-founders, ultimately it was Sam's decision to make about the situation, he said. We then had our next witness, Paradigm co-founder Matt Huang. Huang took the stand and we found out that Paradigm is a venture capital firm, and he'd had concerns about the, quote, entanglement between FTX and Alameda, but moved forward with his investment anyway because he thought the strengths were too compelling to pass up. Paradigm had invested around $278 million into FTX and told the courts that Paradigm currently valued it at zero. Paradigm itself had pushed SBF to create a board of directors as Huang was concerned about the lack of a traditional corporate governance model, and SBF told him that establishing the board was a vague part of a future plan. So that was it for the witnesses this week, and what have we actually learned this week? Well, apparently SBF had lied about Alameda having preferential treatment, telling investors that it didn't, and we heard that he directed the coding changes and gave it that unlimited credit. We heard that SBF knew that Alameda was using customer funds, and he'd been questioned about it well before the events of the collapse in November. And we also heard that SBF was resistant to having a corporate governance and board structure. Essentially some form of risk management there. To me, that all says that the government have made a fairly good job at this point, at least, of saying that here's someone who knew what was going on, either directly, because it was something that he led, or indirectly, because people around him told him so. In this short summary of the week, the most puzzling item to me is what wasn't there. Now, the defence have said that they are looking to adopt an advice of counsel defence. And as a reminder, that is a defence where you say, it might have been illegal, but I was just following advice of counsel, and so essentially it's their fault. Anyway, there was nothing that the defence seemed to say or question that touched on that. Perhaps they're waiting for their own witnesses to drill into it. We'll have to wait and see. And as the hand of subscribe presses the notification bell that signifies the end of the week, it ponders whether Sam Bankman-Fried was playing League of Legends on his laptop during the week. Bye for now.